The night market in Prague had existed for 300 years in various forms, shifting locations the way water shifts around stone, always finding the low ground, always finding the dark. It operated in the hour between 11 and midnight, tucked into the cobblestoned throat of a street that did not appear on any modern map. The stalls sold things that had no business being sold. Bottled silence, preserved shadows, letters written in languages that had died before the printing press was invented. The humans who wandered in thought it was an artisan market, the kind that charged 40 euros for a candle and called it a spiritual experience. They browsed and bought, and left with their wallets lighter, and a faint, inexplicable feeling that something had noticed them. Rowan Voss had been coming here for 6 years, since the accident that had taken her sight at 22. Not to buy anything, to listen. She had discovered early on, in the grinding months of rehabilitation and grief and furious adjustment, that losing one sense had not diminished her. It had redistributed her. The world had not gone dark so much as it had gone deep. Sounds had texture now. Temperatures told stories. The air in a room could tell her more about who was in it than eyes ever had. People thought blindness was an absence. Rowan had learned it was a translation. She navigated the market with a folded white cane and the particular confidence of someone who has memorized a space not through sight, but through the soles of her feet. The cobblestones changed pitch near the eastern stalls. The air smelled of beeswax and old paper to the left, copper and something iron sweet to the right. She had a mental map built from 6 years of Tuesday night visits, and she moved through it like water moves through a familiar channel. Unhurried, certain, she was reaching for a jar of something the vendor had described as crystallized memory, which she suspected was honey with an excellent marketing strategy, when the crowd shifted. It happened the way crowd movements always happened, one person adjusting, triggering a ripple, the ripple becoming a wave, and then 20 people were moving at once, and Rowan was directly in the path of it. Her cane caught between 2 cobblestones. She stumbled, lost her orientation, and put her hand out to stop herself from falling. Her palm landed on someone's chest. She registered several things simultaneously. The fabric was exceptional, the kind of wool that costs more than most people's rent, dense and cool to the touch. The chest beneath it was absolutely still. No rise, no fall, no rhythm of breath. And the temperature was wrong. Not cold exactly, but the specific absence of warmth that belongs to stone, to marble, to things that have never had heat. She had touched statues in museums. She had pressed her hands to stone walls in ancient churches. This was the same quality of stillness, but with a heartbeat that was not there. She recovered her footing. She did not step back. She should have stepped back. Every reasonable instinct she possessed said to apologize, to recalibrate, to continue with her evening. But the stillness under her hand was so complete, so absolute, that her curiosity snagged on it the way cloth snags on a nail. She had spent 6 years reading people through touch, a hand held too tightly, a shoulder braced against the world, a jaw set against a pain so old it had become structural. She read suffering the way other people read faces. What she felt beneath her palm was not suffering exactly. It was the place suffering goes when it has been there long enough to forget it is suffering. A hollowness. A vast, exhausted absence. The feeling of a room where a fire has not been lit for so long that the ash in the grate has turned to powder. She tilted her face upward. She reached up, both hands now, a gesture she never made with strangers. She was not sure why she did it. Later she would tell herself it was the healer's instinct, the one that had made her a massage therapist before the accident and had stubbornly persisted afterward. But the truth was simpler and less explainable. Something in that stillness called to her the way a locked door calls to the right key. Her fingers found a jaw. Sharp, precise, skin cool as the inside of her thumbs moved across cheekbones with the careful, systematic exploration she had learned in her first year of blindness, mapping a face the way a cartographer maps unmeasured territory, learning it. High forehead, strong nose, slightly aquiline, a mouth held in a line that was not cruel, but had forgotten what ease felt like, and eyes, she could feel the faint architecture around them, the orbital bone, the temple, the subtle tension in the muscles around them. The person, the man, she was certain he was a man, had gone completely, utterly still. Not the stillness of surprise, something older. The stillness of a creature that has learned not to move when something unexpected touches it, because stillness is the only response that does not require feeling. She said it before she could decide whether to say it. You are in pain, not a question. An observation. The same tone she would use to tell someone their shoulder was carrying 3 weeks of unresolved tension. Matter of fact, precise, completely without fear. The silence that followed was the loudest silence she had ever stood inside. The market noise continued around them, haggling and footsteps, and the distant sound of something that might have been a violin. But inside the small radius of the two of them, everything had stopped. He had not spoken. He had not moved. She kept her hands where they were, not pressing, just resting. The way you rest your hand on the cover of a book you are not sure you are ready to open. She could feel the tension running through him, like a current. Not anger. She knew anger. She had felt it often enough in the bodies of clients who thought they were only stiff. This was different. This was the tension of someone who has just been seen by someone they had not given permission to see them. "Who are you?" he said at last. His voice was extraordinary. Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself to be heard. It carried the specific authority of something very old, the way a cathedral carries authority not through volume, but through sheer accumulated weight of years. She had heard old voices before. This was the oldest voice she had ever heard in her life, and it wore its age the way very old things do, not as decay, but as density. "My name is Rowan," she said. I got turned around in the crowd. I apologize for the hands. Occupational habit. What is your occupation? I read bodies, she said simply. I am a therapeutic practitioner. Muscle memory, injury patterns, stress accumulation. It is mostly science and partly something I have never been able to name properly. Another silence, shorter this time. And what do my hands tell you? He said, and she noticed he had shifted one hand slightly toward her, not offering it, not withdrawing it, something in between. A question in a gesture. She found his hand. She held it in both of hers. His fingers were long, the knuckles precisely articulated, the skin smooth in a way that suggested no labor, no sun damage, no ordinary accumulation of human living. She pressed her thumb into his palm with the careful graduated pressure of someone who knows exactly what they tell me, she said slowly, feeling her way through the information the way she felt her way through rooms, that you have been holding something for a very long time. The tension is not in the muscles, it is deeper, the kind that is not physical anymore. She paused. She turned his hand over. This hand has not been held, she said, not in a very long time. She felt something move through him. Not a flint, something slower. A shift, the way ice shifts when something underneath it changes. You are remarkably perceptive, he said. His voice was still controlled. But the control was working harder now. She could hear it, the way you can hear the effort in a held breath. I am mostly just paying attention, Rowan said. Most people do not. The crowd moved again around them, indifferent and continuous. Somewhere to her left a vendor was arguing about a price. Somewhere above them a window opened and released the smell of wood smoke and something savory into the cold night air. The world continued its ordinary business entirely unaware that 30 seconds ago It had produced something neither of the two people standing in the cobblestone street had expected. She lowered his hand. She found her cane. She reset her orientation. She was 3 stalls from the honey vendor, east wall, slight incline underfoot. "Thank you," he said. The 2 words landed strangely, like coins dropped into a very deep well. "I did not do anything," Rowan said honestly. "You noticed," he said. That was sufficient. She walked away. She did not hear him follow. She did not hear any sound from him at all, but she felt, with the particular precision she had developed in 6 years of paying attention, that he watched her until she disappeared around the corner of the eastern stalls, and that the watching was not surveillance. It was the way a person watches something they have already lost before they have had it, with a grief that knows its own name. She bought the crystallized memory honey. It tasted, when she got home, remarkably ordinary, but she could not stop thinking about a hand that had not been held in a very long time, and a voice that carried the weight of years without complaint, and the sound of 2 simple words spoken into the cold Prague night by someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be noticed. Aldrich had served the Valdres bloodline for 460 years and had, in that time, developed a comprehensive taxonomy of his lord's moods. There was the cold fury, glacial and architectural, which meant someone was going to have a deeply unpleasant conversation before dawn. There was the philosophical melancholy, which arrived in cycles like weather and required a specific vintage and strategic solitude. There was the dry amusement, rare and precise, which he privately considered the most dangerous because it meant his lord was interested in something, and interest was the beginning of all complications. He had never, in 460 years, seen this particular expression. Aldrich stood in the doorway of the map room, watching his lord stand at the window with one hand resting on the glass, staring at the city below with an expression Aldrich could only describe as interrupted, the way a person looks when they have been in the middle of a thought for 700 years and someone has just walked through it. "My lord," Aldrich said, "the Brower situation requires your attention. They have moved 3 units of the shipment without authorization, and the Eastern representative is asking for a formal response by tomorrow's close." Cassian did not turn from the window. "The Brower situation can wait until Thursday," he said. "It is already Thursday, my lord. Then, it can wait until next Thursday." Aldrich absorbed this. In 4.5 centuries of service, he had learned to absorb a great deal without visible reaction. It was essentially his entire skill set. "My lord, the Brower house has been a tributary of this bloodline for 2 centuries. A delayed response will be read as weakness. Let them read it as whatever they like," Cassian said. He turned from the window. He had dark eyes, the particular dark that has no bottom to it, and a face that had not changed since 1317, and had not been young even then. He looked like someone had taken the concept of composure and built a person out of it. He was looking at his own hand, not examining it, looking at it the way you look at a place where something has just happened, trying to decide if the ground has changed. Aldrich recognized this with the particular dread of a man who has spent centuries watching his charge walk toward complications with the serene confidence of someone who has never had to live with consequences in the conventional sense. "May I ask," Aldrich said carefully, "whether something occurred at the market this evening?" Cassian set his hand down on the table. "Someone touched my face," he said. Aldrich waited. There had to be more. There was always more. "She was blind," Cassian continued. "She lost her way in the crowd and put her hands up. She read my face." He paused. "She said I was in pain." Aldrich considered several responses and discarded all of them. "What did you say?" he asked at last. "Nothing useful," Cassian said. "I gave her my name." He stopped. "No, I did not give her my name. I asked for hers." Aldrich felt the particular sensation of a man watching the first small stones begin to shift on a mountainside. "Hers," he repeated. "And what was it?" "Rowan." She said her name was Rowan. She is a therapeutic practitioner. She reads bodies for injury and tension. She was at the market to buy honey. He said this last part with a tone of faint as though the honey was the detail that most defied his understanding. She said I had been holding something for a very long time. Had she been sent? Aldrich asked immediately. The Brower House has affiliates who use human operatives. No, Cassian said. His certainty was absolute and instantaneous. No. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A woman who got turned around in a crowd and has excellent hands and no concept of appropriate caution. Aldrich pressed his fingers together. And you are telling me this because... Cassian looked at him with the expression of a man who is not accustomed to not knowing the answer to a question. Because it has been approximately 2 hours and I have not thought about anything else, he said. That is unusual. In 460 years, Aldrich had performed many services for this bloodline. He had managed political crises, diplomatic disasters, 3 territorial wars, and 1 genuinely catastrophic situation involving a printing press in 1502 that they had agreed never to discuss. He had not been trained for this particular category of problem because this particular category of problem had never presented itself before. His lord had been interested in humans before, certainly, intellectually, strategically, occasionally aesthetically. Never like this. Never with the specific quality of attention that meant the interest had found a crack in something and was living there now. What do you know about her? Aldrich asked, because information was always the correct first response. Information could be managed. Information was structural. He could build a response out of information even if he could not yet see the shape of what he was responding to. Only what I have told you. She comes to the market on Tuesday nights. She has been coming for 6 years. She knows the layout by memory. She moves without hesitation. She is not afraid of anything she encounters there. He paused. She was not afraid of me. People are not always aware of what they should fear, Aldrich said. She was aware, Cassian said quietly. She knew something was different. I could feel her register it, the temperature, the stillness, the absence of breath. She registered all of it, and she stayed. She did not reclassify it as something explainable. She simply continued paying attention. He was quiet for a moment. I have not been paid that quality of attention in a very long time. Aldrich sat down. This was severe enough to require sitting. My lord, he said, in the measured tone he reserved for conversations that were going to require all of his patience and half his remaining professional dignity. I must counsel considerable caution. You counsel caution about everything. Because caution has preserved this house for 6 centuries. A human woman who makes her living reading the pain in other people's bodies and who is not afraid of things that should frighten her is either an asset or a liability, and the distinction matters enormously. We know nothing about her, her affiliations, her circumstances, whether she speaks of what she encounters at the market. He paused. Whether she will return next Tuesday. The question landed in the room with the particular weight of a question that already has an answer. Cassian turned back to the window. Send someone to find out what is findable, he said. Not through her life. I want nothing invasive. Public record only. Name, occupation, verified. Aldrich stood. And the Brower situation. Thursday, Cassian said. The real Thursday. Aldrich left the room with the expression of a man who has just identified the beginning of something very large and is not certain he has adequate equipment. He had seen his lord survive wars. He had seen him navigate the collapse of empires without flinching. He had watched him stand in the ruins of things that had taken centuries to build and feel nothing, or perform nothing so perfectly it was indistinguishable from feeling nothing. He had never seen him look at his own hand the way he had looked at it tonight. He found Marco in the corridor outside, the large, perpetually unimpressed guard who had been with the household since the Renaissance, and who had developed, over the centuries, an uncanny instinct for when things were about to get complicated. He was leaning against the wall, reading something on his phone, with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to waiting out historical events. A research request, Aldrich said. Discreet, a woman named Rowan. Therapeutic practitioner, Prague. Everything that is findable without approach. Marco looked up. His expression did not change, but something moved in his eyes. That kind of thing, he said. Aldrich pulled his coat straighter. Find out what you can, he said. And Marco. He paused with his hand on the corridor wall. Be thorough. He walked back toward the administrative wing, with 460 years of loyal service at his back, and the uncomfortable feeling that he was walking, very steadily and very professionally, toward a significant amount of trouble. Rowan had not told anyone about the man at the market. This was partly because she did not have a good explanation for what had happened, and she had learned over 6 years of blindness that the things she could not explain tended to confuse people who had not made her particular adjustments to the world. Partly it was because her flatmate Daria had a very loud reaction to most things, and Rowan was not yet in the right place to have this particular thing reacted to loudly. Mostly it was because she was still turning it over in her hands, like an object she had found, and not yet identified. She worked through it during sessions, her hands on someone's trapezius, her mind quietly in a Prague street, replaying the texture of a face, the weight of a hand, 2 words dropped into silence, like they had been saving themselves for the right moment. The quality of stillness. The voice. She thought about the pain most. She had felt a great many kinds of pain in her practice. Fresh injury, hot and urgent. Old grief, calcified into posture. The particular exhaustion of people who had been strong for too long without permission to stop. But what she had felt in that face, in that hand, was different in scale. It was not personal pain, not situational, not the product of months or years of accumulated difficulty. It felt geological. The kind of pain that has been there long enough to become the landscape. She went back to the market on Tuesday. She told herself it was for the honey. The honey was genuinely excellent. She had finished the first jar in 4 days, which was not something she intended to examine. She arrived at 11 as she always did, navigated the familiar cobblestones, said hello to the woman at the beeswax stall, whose name she had learned was Berta, and who always saved her the good honey. She bought a jar. She stood for a moment at the eastern wall, feeling the cold air move across the market, listening to the specific frequency of it. 200 people doing commerce in an impossible place on a Tuesday night in November. She did not hear him approach. She felt him instead, the displacement of air, the drop in ambient temperature, the particular quality of attention that has mass and weight when it is concentrated enough. He was there before she could have said how she knew he was there. Hello, she said, without turning. A pause. You cannot see me, he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, low, dense, carrying its years without. How did you know I was there? You changed the air, she said. Everything does, but you do it more distinctly than most things I have encountered. She turned toward him. She was holding her honey. She felt faintly and unexpectedly that this was a ridiculous thing to be holding for this conversation, but there was nothing to be done about it now. Did you come to find me? She asked. Or is this coincidence? I do not believe in coincidence, he said. I find it intellectually lazy. She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh. She had not expected to laugh. The laugh surprised him too. She could tell from the half-beat of silence that followed it, the quality of attention shifting slightly, recalibrating. I looked for you last Tuesday, she said. Deciding honesty was simpler. You were not there. I was otherwise engaged. He paused. I was also, he said after a moment, deciding whether to come. She nodded slowly. That seemed right. That seemed like exactly the kind of thing he would do. Decide, carefully, with the full weight of whatever he was, whether to come back to a market on a Tuesday night to find a blind woman who had put her hands on his face and told him something he had not expected to hear. What made you decide? She asked. You were not afraid, he said simply. She turned the honey jar in her hands. I was a little afraid, she said honestly. Not of you specifically, of the thing I felt, the scale of it. That kind of pain is frightening because it suggests a very long time. She paused. And I am curious about long times. Why? Because mine feels very short sometimes, she said. I am 28. I have been blind for 6 years. Most of my experience of the world has been compressed into a very small space and has become very dense because of it. She was not sure why she was telling him this. She told it to the space where his voice came from, directly and without decoration. I notice things other people do not because I have to. It is the primary compensation. She paused. What I noticed in your face was not something I could. Another silence. These silences, she was beginning to understand, were not empty. They were full. He carried his silences the way he carried everything, with a complete control that was not coldness, but was the product of learning, very long ago, that expressions were a currency and should not be spent carelessly. My name is Cassian, he said. She held it for a moment. Cassian, she repeated. It suited him, old, structural, carrying a history in its syllables, not a name chosen for charm. A name that had been given before charm was a consideration. Rowan, she said, though he already knew it. Formality seemed right. It seemed like what this required. I know, he said. I looked. She raised an eyebrow. You looked. Public record only, he said, and she had the impression this distinction mattered to him, that he wanted her to know it. Name, occupation, practice address. He paused. You have very good reviews. She laughed again. That second laugh felt easier than the first. She could feel something in him shift slightly toward it, not leaning in, not that demonstrative, but orienting. The way a plant orients toward light without appearing to move. Walk with me, he said. If you are willing. She tucked the honey under her arm and found her cane. She was willing. She was more than willing, which was the part that would take some time to properly account for. They walked the perimeter of the market and then out of it, into the quiet street beyond. He matched her pace exactly, not slowing for her or compensating, simply moving alongside her at the speed she chose, which was a more sophisticated understanding of how to walk with someone who is blind than most people managed on the first attempt. She noticed this. She noticed everything. He told her almost nothing, and she understood everything. He spoke about the city the way people speak about places they have known long enough that the history is personal, not academic. He mentioned a building in the 2nd district that had been different once, the way you mention a building you watched being built. He knew the weight of the cobblestones, the older streets, the ones that had been laid by hand in a century before machines were a concept. He spoke about it with the proprietary familiarity of ownership, though not the crude kind. You have been here a long time, she said. Yes, he said. How long? The pause this time was different. Longer, the pause of someone deciding how much truth to offer. Long enough that the city has changed around me several times, he said carefully. Long enough that I know its old names. She walked beside him in the cold November street and let that sit where it landed. She did not push at it. She had learned, in 6 years of adjusting to a world she could not see, that some information needed to come in its own time, that forcing things produced only resistance, that patience was not passivity, but a more sophisticated form of attention. They walked for 40 minutes. He brought her back to the market at 5 to midnight without being asked, which meant he had tracked the time and her comfort both without making either visible. At the eastern stalls he stopped. "Next Tuesday," he said. It was not quite a question. She found her way to the corner she knew. She turned back toward where his voice was. "Next Tuesday," she said. "And Cassian." She said his name deliberately, the way she had said "you are in pain," directly, without apology. "Thank you for coming back." She walked home. The cold honey jar pressed against her side through her coat the entire way, and she thought about old names for old streets, and a voice that had been carrying its years since before her city had been built. The report Marco delivered was thorough and unremarkable in all the ways that mattered, and deeply remarkable in the single way that did not. Rowan Voss. 28. Born in Vienna, relocated to Prague at 19 for university. Stayed, degree in physiotherapy, additional certification in therapeutic bodywork. Practiced from a small studio in the 2nd District. Clients described her in reviews with words like perceptive, extraordinary, changed my life. One review, left by someone who called themselves only M, said simply, "She found what I had stopped looking for. Lost her sight at 22 in an accident involving a car and a November morning, and no one's specific fault. The kind of accident that is so ordinary in its mechanics and so catastrophic in its consequences that it refuses to carry meaning. No family in Prague, parents in Vienna, one younger brother. Flatmate named Daria, occupation listed as chaotic, which Marco had noted was not a formal employment category, but appeared accurate based on available social media evidence. No affiliations, no connections to any supernatural community, any house, any bloodline, no history of unusual activity. She went to the market because she liked the vendors and the sounds, had been going since 3 months after her accident, when a friend had taken her once, and she had simply kept going. She was, in every findable way, exactly what she had appeared to be. Cassian read the report once and set it down. He picked it up and read it again. He was looking, Aldrich understood, for the thing that explained the situation in manageable terms. The hidden affiliation, the strategic motive, the angle. Because those things were comprehensible. Those things had responses. Those things fit inside the architecture of a world he had been navigating for 700 years. There was no angle. There was only a woman who had reached up in a crowd and found his face with her hands and paid better attention to him in 30 seconds than anything had in the better part of a century. She is unaffiliated, Aldrich confirmed unnecessarily. "I can read," Cassian said. "Of course, my lord." He paused. "May I speak plainly?" "You always speak plainly. It is either your greatest asset or your most significant limitation depending on the occasion." "She is human," Aldrich said. "Young, by our measure. Mortal, in every conventional sense. Whatever she felt in your face, whatever she said, it was the assessment of a skilled practitioner who encountered an unusual subject. It does not constitute a connection." He paused. It would be inadvisable to treat it as one. Cassian looked at him with the particular expression that meant he had already considered everything Aldrich was about to say and had arrived somewhere beyond it. "I walked with her for 40 minutes last Tuesday," he said. "She did not ask me what I was. She did not ask me to explain myself. She asked about the city and listened to what I said and understood what I did not say." He was quiet. In 700 years, I have had perhaps 3 conversations that felt like that. Aldrich sat with this carefully. "I understand, my lord. But understanding and advising are 2 different things, and my advice is caution. Connection with a human has a lifespan built into it. She will age." He stopped, because this was not news, and saying it aloud to this man who had outlived everyone he had ever allowed himself to care about felt both necessary and unnecessarily brutal. I am aware, Cassian said, of how it ends. He said it without bitterness, without even particular sorrow, just the flat acknowledgement of someone who has long since integrated the worst knowledge into the working structure of daily existence. I have always been aware of how it ends. He looked at Aldrich. That has not historically prevented the beginning. Aldrich thought of 460 years of beginnings he had witnessed. The ones that had ended in grief so profound it had taken decades to dissipate. The ones that had ended in the particular kind of silence that is louder than anything. He thought of his lord standing at windows in the small hours, not pacing, just standing. The stillness of someone who has learned that movement does not help, but has not learned what does. He picked up the report. He set it back down. She goes to the market every Tuesday, he said. It was not advice. It was simply information, which was the only category of thing he had ever been able to reliably offer. Yes, Cassian said. He was already at the window. She does. Marco appeared in the doorway that evening with the expression of a man who has placed a wager and is beginning to feel reasonably confident about the outcome. He said nothing. He had learned over several centuries that silence was frequently more efficient than speech, and he had developed a talent for the specific kind of silence that communicated everything without requiring him to be directly involved in the consequences. He was already quietly calculating odds. She had not expected him to find her studio. She had not expected him not to find it either, which was perhaps more honest. She had thought about it on Thursday and Friday, and concluded that he was someone who found things he wanted to find, and the question was only whether he wanted to. He knocked at 6 on a Wednesday evening, which was between her last client of the day and the beginning of the part of the evening she spent on the sofa with a podcast and something warm to drink. She answered the door in her work clothes, which were comfortable and professional, and not what she would have chosen if she had known, though she acknowledged immediately and privately that she would not have changed them even if she had known, because changing them would have meant admitting she wanted to make an impression, and she was not ready to admit that yet. You found me, she said. You are in a public directory, he said. It was not a difficult finding. You could have waited until Tuesday. A pause. Yes, he said. I could have. She stepped back from the door. She felt the threshold between them, the specific moment where an invitation becomes an invitation. Come in, she said. I have tea. She paused. I assume you do not drink tea. I do not drink tea, he confirmed, crossing the threshold. She heard him take in the room, not with eyes. She was past imagining what his eyes did with a space, but with the particular full-body attention she had come to associate with him. He moved through her studio with the same consideration he had moved through the market, not touching anything, not requiring anything to shift to accommodate him. She put the kettle on. She had a specific system in her kitchen, everything in assigned locations, everything labeled in a combination of regular print and the braille she had learned with the focused desperation of someone acquiring a survival language. She moved through it with the efficiency of 6 years of practice. Tell me about your work, he said. He had found the chair near the window. She could tell by the direction of his voice. The asking felt genuine, not polite conversation, not small talk. He asked questions the way he did everything, with the full weight of his attention behind them. She told him. She told him about the theory of it first, the way the body records what the mind tries to release, the way grief lives in the shoulders, the way old fear calcifies in the base of the neck, the way unexpressed anger becomes the kind of tension that masquerades as a structural problem until someone finds it and knows what they are looking at. She told him about learning to work without sight, the way it had changed her hands, made them more precise, more patient, the way she had stopped relying on visual confirmation and learned to trust entirely what her fingers told her. He listened without interruption. This was, she had learned over 3 weeks of knowing him, one of his most significant qualities. He listened the way people had listened before the world got fast, with the complete allocation of himself, no part of his attention somewhere else. And the people you treat, he said when she finished. Do they know what you find? I tell them what I find, she said. In terms they can use, not always the whole of it. There are things in people's bodies that belong to them and should be named by them, not by me. He was quiet for a moment. That is a significant restraint, he said, for someone who sees clearly. I do not see, she said. She said it without edge. It was simply true. A longer quiet. I meant it in the other sense, he said. And I should not have used that word without thinking. She wrapped her hands around her mug. It is fine, she said. And then, because she was curious and because she had decided somewhere in the middle of the previous week that she was going to be straightforwardly honest with this man, she said, What do you see when you look at me? The question settled in the room. He did not deflect it. He considered it with the seriousness it deserved. I see someone who has built something very precise and very strong out of a loss that would have reduced most people, he said finally. Not reduced in the diminishing sense. I mean the way a fire reduces wood. What is left is denser than what was there before. He paused. I see someone who is not afraid of things that are difficult to explain. She thought about this. Are you difficult to explain? She asked. Considerably, he said. She smiled. She had a feeling this was going to be a recurring theme. She stood and carried her mug to the sink and stood at the window where the cold air came through the gap at the frame. She could feel his attention following her, that weighted quality of it, the way it had mass. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes, the pain I felt, she said carefully, because she had been thinking about how to say this for 10 days and had not found a better way. In your face. In your hands. I felt it again when we walked on Tuesday, under everything else, under the conversation in the city. It is very old. I have never felt anything that old. She paused. Is it something that can be helped? The silence this time was the longest yet. She stood at the window and let it be as long as it needed to be. I do not know, he said at last. His voice was different, stripped of something. The control was still there, but it was thinner, and she could hear underneath it the thing the control was containing. I have not considered the question in a very long time. Consider it, she said simply. He did not answer, but he stayed for another hour, and they talked about smaller things, her brother's upcoming wedding and a piece of music she had been listening to, and a political situation in the 3rd District that he had opinions about in the specific way of someone who had watched political situations in this city resolve and repeat for longer than the current. Political situation had existed as a concept. She laughed several times. He almost laughed twice. She could hear it in the compression of his voice, the thing that nearly broke into warmth and then was managed back into something more composed. When he left, he said next Wednesday with the same tone he had used to say next Tuesday at the market. Not quite a question, not quite a statement, the specific tone of something that is decided. Next Wednesday, she confirmed. She closed the door. She stood in her kitchen in the specific quality of stillness left by someone who has just departed, the echo of presence that lingers in a room for several minutes after the actual person is gone. His echo was larger than most. It displaced more air. It lasted longer. She finished her tea. She started her podcast. She listened to approximately 4 minutes of it before she gave up and sat with the particular internal quiet of someone who is beginning to understand that something is starting, and who is not, despite all reasonable reservation, afraid. He told her on a Wednesday 3 weeks later. Not because he had planned to. Because she had asked the right question at exactly the right moment, and he had discovered, to his considerable surprise, that he did not want to lie to her. They were in the studio again. She had started to read him after each session with a client, not formally, just her hands finding the architecture of tension that accumulated in him during the management of what he was. He had not asked for this. She had simply begun doing it one evening, matter-of-factly, with the same professional attention she brought to everything, and he had found he could not locate a reason to stop her. Tonight she was working on the specific tension he carried at the base of his skull, which she had described on the first occasion as the kind of accumulation that happens when someone has been in command for a very long time, without a sufficient number of people telling them no. He had not denied this. "You were born in what?" she said. Her thumbs moved in the patient-graduated pressure that he had come to understand was her most precise instrument. She was not asking carelessly. He could tell the difference now between her conversational questions and her real ones. The real ones had a specific quality of readiness. She was ready to receive whatever he offered. 1317, he said. Her hands did not stop. He had half expected them to. She continued the movement, steady, professional, deliberate, in what is now, she said slowly, Romania, a province of what was then the Hungarian crown. Yes, she worked in silence for a moment. So you are, she said, calculating. 709, he said. Give or take. She said nothing for what felt like a long time. Her hands were still moving. He focused on that. The specific reality of it. The fact that she had been told something that should, by any rational measure, have caused her to stop, and she had not stopped. When you say you were born, she said carefully. You mean? I mean I was born, he said. Human, in the conventional sense. I was 31 when I was turned. He paused. It was not a choice, at the time. Choices about such things were not common in the 14th century. Is it common now? It is more formalized, he said. There are protocols. Considerations, he paused again. I have not turned anyone in over 2 centuries. Her hand slowed, not stopped. Slowed, with the quality of someone integrating information, adjusting the map. Why are you telling me this? She said. Her voice was not afraid. It was careful. There was a difference. Because you asked me 3 weeks ago if the pain was something that could be helped, he said, and I have been thinking about it since. And I think the honest answer requires the honest context. She lifted her hands. She was quiet for a long moment. He felt the absence of her hands with a precision that was disproportionate to the length of time they had been. You have been in pain for 700 years, she said. She said it the same way she had said it the first time. Matter of fact. Precise. An observation, not a verdict. Not without interruption, he said. But yes, in the structural sense. In the way that becomes the landscape. Yes, she came around and sat in the chair across from him. He could not see her face reading him the way other people's faces read things, but he had learned to understand her expressions through sound, the specific quality of her silences, the way her breathing shifted when she was processing something large. What causes it? She said. He considered where to begin. He had not talked about this, not to Aldrich, not to anyone who had persisted long enough to ask. What causes it is a question that has several layers, he said. The most superficial layer is loneliness, which is too simple a word for something this scale, but which is the nearest available approximation. I have existed for 7 centuries, and the particular nature of that existence means that everything I encounter is temporary. He paused. Everyone. She sat with that. The deeper layer, he continued, is something harder to name. It is the accumulation of witness. I have watched an extraordinary amount of human life, its best and worst versions, its patterns and its exceptions, its capacity for both tremendous courage and tremendous cruelty. 700 years of watching something and being unable to fully participate in it, because the terms of my participation are categorically different, produces a specific kind of grief. He stopped. I had not articulated that before, he said, with faint surprise. Not in those terms. You have been alone with it, she said. Yes, she leaned forward. She found his hand on the arm of the chair with the accuracy that still, weeks in, surprised him. The way she navigated to things she could not see with a reliability that felt like more than compensation. She held his hand the way she had held it the first night at the market. Her thumb moved in that careful, precise pressure. "It is not untreatable," she said. Her voice was not offering false comfort. It was the same voice she used for everything. Direct, professional, honest. "It is very old and it is very deep, and it would take a very long time. But pain that has been witnessed accurately is already different from pain that has not been witnessed at all." She paused. "You know that now. You can feel the difference." He could. That was the remarkable thing. He could feel in the specific place where her thumb was pressing the difference between what had been there 3 weeks ago and what was there now. It was not healed. It was not even significantly diminished. But it was seen. And seen was different from unseen in ways that 700 years of managing his own interior in complete solitude had not prepared him for. He turned his hand over and held hers. Not a clinical grip. Not the gesture of a man receiving treatment from a practitioner. The simple, unstrategic holding of one person's hand by another. She did not reclassify it. She did not manage it back into professional territory. She sat in the chair across from him in the studio in the 2nd District in Prague and held his hand in the quiet. And the quiet was the kind that is full rather than empty. The kind that means something is present rather than absent. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary evening. Cars and voices, and the distant sound of something playing in a restaurant 2 streets over. The world continuing its business at its usual pace, indifferent to the fact that in a small studio above the 2nd District, something that had been sealed for a very long time was very slowly and very carefully beginning to open. Aldrich said nothing for 3 weeks, which was itself a form of saying something. He managed the household with his customary precision. He handled the Brouwer situation, the Eastern Territorial matter, 2 minor inter-house disputes, and a financial irregularity in the Vienna account. He did his job with 4.5 centuries of professional competence, and he did not mention Rowan Voss. He did not mention the Wednesday evenings. He did not mention the way his lord moved through the castle now, with a quality of presence that was different from before, less like a building that had been sealed against weather, and more like a building that had remembered it had rooms. He waited. He was very good at waiting. He had waited out empires. On a Thursday evening, he found Cassian in the library, reading something that was not administrative, which was itself unusual. He stood in the doorway long enough for the silence to become an invitation. "She knows," Aldrich said. "Yes," Cassian said without looking up. "Everything, the essential facts," Cassian said. She asked. "I told her." Aldrich moved to the chair by the fireplace and sat, which he only did when the conversation required it. His lord looked up at this. He knew Aldrich's social grammar. "She did not run," Cassian said before Aldrich could begin. "No," Aldrich paused. "How long have you known her now?" 2 months. "And she has raised no alarm, made no move to document or expose, made no contact with any entity that might have an interest in the information she now possesses." "She is not interested in exposure," Cassian said. His voice had the flat certainty of a man who has thought about this thoroughly and arrived somewhere he trusts. "She is interested in the pain." Aldrich sat with this. In a very long career, he had encountered many categories of human involvement with their world, from the purely strategic to the genuinely dangerous to the knave. He had learned to categorize quickly and respond accordingly. Rowan Voss did not fit any of his existing categories. A woman who had been told an impossible truth and had responded by asking what was causing the pain and whether it could be helped was not, in his experience, a category he had a prepared response for. "She is a healer," he said, thinking aloud. "Not a strategist. She is both," Cassian said quietly. "She simply does not use the second in the way we are accustomed to encountering it." Aldrich looked at the fire. He had a specific way of looking at fires when he was thinking through something he did not want to get wrong. It was one of 3 habits he had never managed to rationalize away despite considerable effort. He is coming to care for her, he thought, though this was not new information. He has been coming to care for her since the first Tuesday. The question was always what caring for her was going to cost and who was going to pay it. She will age, he said, because it was the thing that always had to be said. I know. You have watched this before. I know. And each time, Aldrich said carefully, it cost you a period of years in recovery that I watched from the outside. He paused. The last time was nearly 60 years ago, and it took you 40 years to become fully functional in any social sense, and I watched every one of those 40 years from the outside, and I am telling you now, as the person who has been watching from the outside longer than anyone alive, that if you are going to do this, if you are going to let this woman into the places you are evidently already letting her, you need to be certain. Cassian set down his book. He looked at Aldrich with an expression that Aldrich had last seen when he was 31 years old, and had just understood what was happening to him in the cellar of a Wallachian castle in 1317. Not afraid. Not resigned. Awake. The face of someone for whom reality has just become, in some specific and irrevocable way, very real. I have not been certain of anything in 400 years, Cassian said. He said it without drama. He said it the way Rowan said difficult true things, directly, without apology. But I am certain that before she walked into the market 2 months ago and put her hands on my face, I was disappearing. Not dying. Disappearing, the way things disappear when they have been in the dark long enough that they forget they have a shape. Aldrich did not move. She is not a cure, Cassian said. I know what she is. She is a person. She is mortal and stubborn, and she reads pain in people's bodies with her hands, and she is not afraid of things she should be afraid of. She is also, he said, and something moved through his voice that Aldrich had not heard in a very long time, the thing that makes the waiting mean something. Aldrich stood. He straightened his jacket in the specific way that meant he was concluding a position and moving to the next thing. He had 460 years of conclusions behind him. I will have Marco continue standard discretion protocols, he said. The household will conduct itself accordingly. He paused at the door. She has good reviews, he said. Marco found them in his research. Very good reviews. He left before Cassian could respond. In the corridor he passed Marco, who was leaning against the wall with the expression of a man in the process of collecting. Aldrich did not acknowledge this. He walked to his office. He sat at his desk. He picked up the Brower correspondence and read it, without absorbing any of it. He thought about 40 years of watching his lord stand at windows in the small hours, and feel nothing and perform nothing in a silence so total it was its own kind of ending. He thought about the library this evening, the book that was not administrative, the quality of presence in the room, the specific weight of the alive. He thought about a woman who had found, in 30 seconds in a crowd, what 460 years of loyal service had never quite managed to locate. He did not resent this. He was not built for resentment. He was built for service, and he had always known, in the part of him that ran on something older than strategy, that the best service he could render was to stand aside for the things that were larger than strategy, and simply make sure the household continued to function around them. He made a note in his ledger. Not about Rowan. About Cassian. 3 words. Present. In the room. He had not written those 3 words in this ledger in a very long time. The first frost came on a Friday and settled over Prague with the quiet authority of something that does not need permission. Rowan felt it in the air when she stepped outside in the morning, that specific bite that means winter has stopped considering and has simply arrived. She navigated to the bakery on the corner and back with her coat buttoned to the throat, and stood in her kitchen afterward with both hands wrapped around a coffee and thought about the fact that she was happy. She noticed it the way she noticed most things now, precisely and without flinching. She was happy, and it was complicated, and both of those things were true at the same time. Cassian arrived that evening as he always did, at 6, which she had come to understand was as close to punctual as a 700-year-old creature of the night was likely to manage when punctuality was technically a human construct. She heard the specific quality of his arrival now, the way she had learned the particular frequency of him, his footsteps, the temperature shift, the weighted attention. She had become fluent in him, the way she had become fluent in her own apartment, through accumulated and careful attention, and the fluency felt like something she had been building toward without knowing it. She had soup on because she was cold, and because she liked having something warm in the apartment when he came, and she understood by now that the soup was for her, and the company was for both of them. She heard him take the chair by the window the way he always did, and she heard the specific quality of his settling, the way he arranged himself in a space, complete and self-contained, a being that took up exactly the room it intended, and no more. "I have been thinking about something," she said. She kept her attention on the soup. "Tell me," he said. She had been thinking about it for 2 weeks. She had been thinking about it with the same patient, systematic attention she brought to her work, feeling around the edges of it, finding its shape. She brought the soup to the table and sat. She wrapped her hands around the bowl. "You said when you told me what you were," she said carefully, "that you had not turned anyone in 2 centuries. She paused. What does that mean? Specifically, what does it feel like for the person? The silence that followed was not the usual kind. It was very still. She sat in it and waited. "It is different for every person," he said at last. His voice had that quality of stripped control again, the thing underneath showing. "It requires a specific kind of compatibility. Not everyone survives it. Those who do are permanently changed in ways that are not always predictable." He paused. "It is not a gift. It should not be treated as one." "I know," she said. "I am not asking because I have decided. I am asking because I am someone who needs to understand the full terrain of a situation before I can make any decision about it." She paused. "I am 28. I have a great deal of living I intend to do in the conventional sense first." He was quiet. She could feel him absorbing this with the full weight of his attention. "But," she continued, and she said it the way she said the real things, directly and without decoration, "you have been here for 700 years, and I have been here for 28, and somehow in 2 months, you have become the most significant person in my life." She said the word person deliberately, and heard him receive it deliberately. "And I am not someone who arrives at a significant truth and then pretends it is not there because it is inconvenient or frightening." "Rowan," he said, and the way he said her name was the same as always, low and precise. But there was something else in it tonight, something that had been building for 2 months, and had apparently reached a point where containment was no longer the appropriate strategy. "I am not finished," she said gently. He stopped. "I want to say something that I have been working out for a while, and I need to say it completely." She took a breath. "You have been in pain for 700 years. Real pain, structural, geological, the kind that has become the landscape. I have been working on it for 2 months with my hands, and I can feel the difference, and I know you can feel the difference too." She paused. "But hands can only do so much. The rest of it, the real depth of it, the loneliness," she used the word he had used, "the accumulation of witness, that cannot be treated by hands. It can only be treated by presence, by someone who knows the full truth of what you are, and stays anyway." The fire crackled in the corner. The frost pressed against the windows. The city moved through its Friday evening outside. "I am staying," she said simply. She heard him move. Not across the room, just the shift of someone who has been holding something carefully for a long time, and has just felt the weight of it change. She found his hand across the table. She did what she had done on the first night at the market, held it in both of hers, and pressed her thumb into his palm with that careful graduated pressure. She felt the difference. She had been feeling the difference accumulate for weeks, layer by layer, the geological pain receding not completely, not dramatically, but measurably. In the specific territory under her hands, something was different from what it had been in November in the cobblestoned street. Something was present that had not been present before. It did not have a clinical name. She had been turning over names for it for 2 months, and the closest she had come was the word occupied. The difference between a house that has been empty for a very long time and a house where someone has recently lit a fire. "You are occupied," she said softly, not quite to him, feeling her way through the observation the way she always did, following it to where it led. "Yes," he said. His voice was very quiet. She had never heard it that quiet. Stripped of the weight of centuries, stripped of authority and control, just a voice in a warm kitchen on a cold Friday evening. "Yes, I am." She leaned her head on her hand and listened to the frost and the city and the fire, and felt under her thumb the specific territory of a pain that was old enough to have forgotten its own origin. Slowly, with enormous patience and no guarantee of speed, learning a different thing. "I am going to grow old," she said. She said it plainly. "I am going to grow old, and you are going to watch it, and it is going to be the hardest thing you have done in 7 centuries, and I cannot make that easier." She paused. "What I can do is make the time before it and the time during it as real and as full as I know how to make it." He turned his hand over in hers. He held it the way he had held it 3 months ago in the studio, the simple, unclinical holding of one person by another, but differently now, with the accumulated weight of 2 months of Wednesdays and Tuesday markets, and long, honest conversations, and the specific knowledge of what was being held, and why. "I told Aldrich," he said, "that you were the thing that makes the waiting mean something." He paused. I did not say it to him adequately. What I meant was that 700 years of accumulation, of witness, of the specific grief of permanent impermanence, all of it has a different quality now. Not because it is resolved. It is not resolved, but because there is someone who knows the full weight of it and is sitting across a table holding my hand and telling me she is staying. He stopped. The stopping had a quality of someone who has reached the end of what language can carry and is standing at the edge of it. She got up from her chair. She came around the table. She put her hands on his face the way she had on the first night, both palms, careful and precise, her thumbs on the architecture of his cheekbones. She had done this dozens of times now. She knew this face the way she knew her own apartment. She knew every line and plane, and the specific temperature of it, and the tension that lived in the jaw, and the stillness around the eyes. She felt the difference. This time undeniably, unmistakably. The stillness was there. It would always be there. It was what he was made of. But it was inhabited differently. The room had a fire in it. The house was not empty. "You are going to be all right," she said. Her voice was her professional voice and her real voice at the same time, because she had long since stopped making a distinction between the two with him. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually, yes, you are going to be all right. He put his hands over hers. Cool, still, his extraordinary precision of grip that always held her exactly as firmly as was needed, and no more. He held her hands to his face and did not move. She stayed like that for a long moment in the kitchen on the cold Friday evening, her hands on his face, his hands over hers, the frost at the windows and the city outside, doing its ordinary indifferent business. She thought about the market in November and a crowd and a stumble and a hand that had not been held, and the specific quality of attention of a voice that had been carrying its years for 7 centuries without anyone to carry them with. She had told a stranger he was in pain. He had not felt anything in 700 years. Both of those things had been true, and both of them, she thought, standing in her kitchen with her hands on the face of someone 7 centuries old, were becoming, slowly and irrevocably, past tense. She stepped back. She sat in her own chair. She picked up her soup. It was still warm. "Next Wednesday," she said. His voice, when it came, had that almost warmth in it. The thing that nearly broke into something lighter and did not quite manage it, and then, this time, did. "Yes," he said. Next Wednesday, and for the first time in 700 years, Cassian of the Valdres bloodline, Lord of the Unseen Empire, sat in a small kitchen above the 2nd District of Prague and felt the specific ordinary weight of something to look forward to. Outside the window, the frost held its ground. Inside, the fire burned. And in the particular quiet of an evening that was both completely unremarkable and entirely unlike any other, something that had been sealed for 700 years sat in the warm and decided, very quietly, to stay.